Hello chaps and chapesses, and this week I'm going to tell you why I am so odd. So what do I mean by that? Yes, I am quite odd, but that's not actually what I really wanted to talk about. What I want to talk about is moving line weights from even numbers to odd numbers. When I first started fly fishing, I know this dates me somewhat, but I think we were just moving from glass fiber into very first generation carbon fiber rods. This was obviously an enormous leap in technology and changed life for so many fly fishermen. Carbon fiber rods were so much faster, they were lighter, but at the same time the early ones potentially weren't quite as strong as glass fiber. We all desperately aspired for the latest generation carbon fiber rods, which at that stage you were looking at early generation Sage, Loomis and Hardys. They were at that point really the only ones who were building fast action rods. Rod manufacturing was actually really in a state of flux. It was an exciting new age of experimenting with new technology and new materials, new resins, and during that time AFTMA system was very loose actually. In fact, at that point quite a lot of rods would have a 2 or 3 AFTMA line weight guidance for you, so you would be fishing something like a 4 to 6 weight, and it was really down to the fly fisherman to decide what action he wanted out of that rod by putting a different line weight on it to actually give you the action, whether you wanted it quicker or whether you wanted it slower. These days line weights are calculated by using formulae and the amount of grains in the lines to actually figure out their designation. A lot of it still comes down to the designer as to what they feel that rod should actually be rated for, and I don't think that will ever really change. The rods of yesteryear were heavier, much thicker blanks, much thicker walls in the blanks, but they were probably a bit tougher than maybe the next generation that came through. You could certainly whack them with certain flies and it didn't really have much of an impact. These days it's come an extremely long way, and that's really where I'm going with this. In the last 20 years or so, rod technology has done an enormous exponential leap forward. Even technology used on the space shuttle has eventually trickled down and found its way into our normal fly fishing rods. It's an extraordinary amount of R&D which has gone into the technology that we use today. And I think what is very important is that we move with that technology. One of the principal things that has really dramatically improved is weight versus strength. So let's take river fishing for example. When I first started river fishing, standard line weight was 6 weight. Now that's a pretty heavy line to be using, and it would have been on a double taper as well. Probably fishing a rod on a 4 to 6 weight, the presentation was hardly ideal. Moving down to 5s and 4s, then you were looked at in a funny way. Nowadays, we now get to a point where you can fish 2s, 3s and 4s on a river. In fact, actually you can use those line weights for even larger species. But now rod technology has evolved to the point where you have an incredibly light rod which can be as much as 10 feet long, and you can fish that in 3 and 4 weight quite comfortably, and it will do the job and cast the size of flies, and more importantly fight fish in the same way that a 5 or a 6 weight used to 15-20 years ago. One of the biggest revolutions that we have seen in rod technology is the introduction of nano titanium molecules into the resin used to bake carbon fiber. Originally designed to make the product much stronger, which it certainly did, what came as a side effect was it made it incredibly light. So you can now fish with rods which literally weigh like a feather. You have huge contact with the fish. These lighter line weights are capable of dealing with far greater demands that you put upon them in a fishing condition. They will cast large flies into a wind. They will fight bigger fish than you could have possibly imagined. There we are fighting salmon on 5 and 6 weights. So why am I odd? Well, here we are in an age where we used to fish 4s, 6s, 8 weights, 10 weights, 12 weights. And a 14 if you were going for something really big. In this modern day of newer technology that we have, you now have the ability to drop an entire line weight. So you can now fish 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 for a lot of the same species that you were before. So on your rivers, instead of fishing 4 weights, you can go down to 3 weights. Instead of fishing on still waters with 6 weights, you can use a 5 weight, which gives you just a little bit more finesse and gentle presentation, but allows you to still fight fish in the same way. In bone fishing, for example, we used to use exclusively 8 weights for bonefish because they were really the only rods which would tackle winds and would tackle casting heavy flies. These days, I would have no qualms about using a 7 weight on the flats for bonefish, and I've caught bonefish well into double figures using 7 weights. And before people get into that argument of, oh, you mustn't fight fish for too long, these rods are more than capable of landing fish in a very short space of time. They have just as much backbone in them as rods of yesteryear. When it comes to small tarpon and even bigger fish, for example, a 9 weight quite often is adequate. I've had huge bumphead parrotfish on 9 weights, and it has extraordinary power to be able to deal with big fish like that. Fish that only you would consider using a 10 weight beforehand. What I'm saying is you shouldn't be afraid to try the modern technology and drop down line sizes. In Iceland, for example, we're now using 5 weights for hitch fishing for salmon. It's so exciting. The rods are still capable of dealing with it, and you can use a longer rod to hitch more effectively. I think where we see this modern technology really hitting home and taking effect is in the much heavier line weights. When you come to using 2-handed rods, for example, I haven't used a 15-footer in years. There used to be a staple rod that I would wave around on bigger rivers. A 13-footer these days will do exactly the same job, will punch ahead just as far, and is capable of dealing with fish of a very large size. You might go to a 14 if you're going to encounter some very big salmon or something like that. But actually, most people are now using switch rods, 11.5 foot. They're using 13-foot rods. These are just much easier rods to fish with, and you have the joy of being able to cast something which weighs very little. In fact, some of those bigger 2-handers you can almost cast single-handedly if you want to. It's a much more pleasurable experience to fish with a lighter line and a lighter rod. But moving onwards, when you move into the saltwater categories, that's when it really makes the difference. So now, even for giant trevally, instead of using a staple 12 weight, which we've always done before, an 11 weight is quite often more than adequate, especially on the flats. If I'm going to fight big GTs and if I know I'm going to be along a reef edge and I need that extra power, then yes, I'll stick with a 12. But the 11 weight is my normal rod that I carry on the flats. So I think for me, it all started really with the Hardy Centrix. The Hardy Centrix rods, which I became closely involved with. When I first had one of those put into my hand, I was absolutely blown away. Here was a completely different beast to anything I'd ever used before. And if you just look at this film and watch this rod being bent all the way around from tip to butt section, I think you will see where I'm coming from. During the testing of this series of rods, I put these things through things I would have never dreamed of. I mean, hooking tuna on 7 weights to see whether I could break them over the gunnels of a boat. And to this day, I don't think I've actually managed to break one. And I've tried pretty hard. Since then, we've seen Centrix technology diversify into the Zephyrus range, which is just a really lovely range of rods to fish, and then moving into the new HBX, which I'm looking forward to getting my hands on. Yes, there are other manufacturers that use some of the similar technology, but as I started with Hardy's and started using this technology with them, I've continued to use their range of rods. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I would urge you to make that jump and move into the modern rod era. Use the modern technology. Take it for everything you can get out of it. Become odd like me, and you may just enjoy your fishing that little bit more. Once again, I hope you found this video of use. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please also press that little notification bell, because then you'll actually know as soon as we upload something. In the meantime, I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.